All right, so welcome to the Agile for Agilists podcast. Today's episode is really cool. We're going to be talking with Mariya Padalko, and as always, I'm your co-host Drew Podwall. Here with me is Brad Nelson, and today's topic that we're going to be talking about is what to do if you're in an Agile organization that is not quite yet embracing the idea of product-based delivery and is still looking at their work from a project viewpoint. So before we get started, I want to introduce Mariya real quick. So, Mariya, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm currently a director of Agile delivery at an ad tech startup. And previously, I've worked as a Scrum Master, as a project manager who's executing in Scrum, and also as a swim coach.
Very cool. And that's like Brad, we were talking the other day on the last episode about like what what do we bring to the table here from our past experiences in completely non-software related roles. And so, Mariya, can you
Mhm.
tell us a little bit briefly about how your background as a swim coach, like what insights have you brought into your work as an agile coach and agile delivery director from being a swim coach?
Sure. The coaching aspect of it and teaching something new to somebody, understanding that they're not going to get it all in one day, understanding that you have to break it up into smaller steps. With swimming in particular, we were teaching children how to swim. And in order to get their position correct in the body, we would have them doing drills and practices that don't resemble the stroke at all, but actually, when you start to put it back into the stroke, allows them to swim more efficiently and with the proper form and technique and all of that. So, really understanding how to like section out a little piece, work on that piece, and then putting it together and seeing what the new result looks like. I think that's the biggest takeaway for me.
That's cool. That's cool. And so I
Yeah.
like you mentioned you do that with kids. I would imagine that, there are parents there and the parents are almost like the stakeholders sometimes in that regard as well.
Absolutely. And it was New York City, so everybody's, very competitive. Schools are extremely competitive. Performing at a high level was a really big topic for us. And what I love about the school that I worked at is the child guided the play, the learning, and it was all done through play. We embrace the fact that information is best retained when it's delivered in a package of fun, and we also understood that despite what the goals for that child might be from the parent, the stakeholder, it's really about maintaining the pace of the child and campaigning for what they need in that scenario and being able to turn it around and say, like, they're getting really good at floating. And so, yes, you can take them into the ocean. Just make sure you're signaling to them that they have to roll onto their back and stick their head out of the water to get a breath. It doesn't have to be a perfect situation, but we can figure out the kind of outcomes that might satisfy.
Cool. So now when you think about that from a standpoint of product versus project, right? Like the idea of swim lessons as a product, right? But you might look at the individual lessons as projects, maybe, right? Like, how does that translate? You think? Well, let's go deeper on that, right? Like, what would swim lessons look like as a product versus what would swim lessons look like as a project?
So, swim lessons looking like a project is there's some kind of goal with a deadline. So, they're going to the Hamptons for the weekend, there's a pool in the backyard, and they want their child to be swimming and having fun in the backyard. And what we would hear is safety is the priority. And we would negotiate that and explain we're going to teach them as much of independent stroke and swimming as possible. But what we're really going to focus on is drilling into them safety practices because the scenario that the child's going to find themselves in might be different. And when we think about swim lessons as a product, we're embracing the fact that that product experience starts with when the parent first picks up the phone. Our school is the product, and the swim lesson on one day or within a certain time frame might be the project. And we did run into this quite often where they want their kids to qualify for the swim team, but the stroke technique's not there, or the endurance is not there, or sometimes the child has no passion for it. they're happy just swimming in the water, having fun. They don't want to compete. And so we would have to balance the needs and the desires of the child and the parent. And we understood that we had multiple customers, not just the lesson isn't just what the child is learning, the lesson is also what the parent might be perceiving. Um,
Now, what does that look like at work?
at work, it's quite interesting. So for me, I think the biggest differentiator of when a company starts embracing product thinking is when at the close of a project, at the hitting of a certain milestone, what they're looking at is not output. How much did we produce? Did we do all the things that we said we're going to do? They're taking a more holistic view and trying to understand, how's the customer going to perceive this? Does this allow us to hit our goal? Have we developed enough to hit this goal so that we can move on to the next thing? The other big differentiator for me is learning from the past. When I was a project manager, my main irritation is I would cycle through these projects. We'd identify improvements that could make the next project go smoother, faster, cheaper, whatever. And we didn't really have an audience for that. So one of the other indicators for me that an organization is embracing product development is, are they capturing the learnings, and are they having discussions or creating room for discussions and reflection on how do we take the learnings from what we've done and turn that into something that's going to make us stronger the next go around.
Yeah, and like with Agile, like we talk about like retrospectives, and we want to draw that into the next sprint. We want to take those impediments, talk about them, look at them as opportunities for improvement, right? And in a project world, right, like there's no time for that. That wasn't a line item on the budget that was improved or approved by the steering committee. So Brad, what have you seen as far as like what's your experience been with companies that are like halfway between project and product?
Yeah, my brain is racing too with swimming puns now.
Do it.
Hopefully,
I
no
want to
one's
hear them.
literally drowning. But well, and I think there's a lot of great analogies there when we're measuring progress. Is it, oh well, how fast can they move their arms, right? Like how fast can you do a breaststroke? Well, it doesn't matter if you're not, actually above water and you're not breathing, right? And you're drowning. Like, oh, I can move my arms really fast underwater, but I drowned. And I feel like that's the case with a lot of these project focused organizations, right? Our major companies like Sears, Nokia, Blockbuster, Toys R Us, all these companies that went out of business. I can't help but wonder, were they measuring like, hey, like productivity metrics? We're doing this thing really, really well. And they're not measuring, are we having the outcomes or the impacts that we need to have to be successful?
I'm actually, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about another really key metric here in the swim analogy is like when I was a kid early on, I hated swim lessons. I went to the YMCA in Mount Kisco. Um, it was hot and steamy and stank like chlorine, and my parents had to drag me into the car. Right, there was a point where I enjoyed it afterwards. I don't think I ever enjoyed the swim lessons at the Mount Kisco Y, but like the metric that stands out to me is how excited are the kids to go to the pool, right? Like you know um, uh, do they have smiles on their face? Are they running out the door, almost jumping in the pool with their clothes on? Or do the parents have to fight tooth and nail to get them in the car, and somewhere in between? And like that's the same thing when it comes to working in software teams, right? When you wake up in the morning and you think about going to work, are you thinking about all of the puzzles that lay ahead, you know that you get to solve that day? Or are you, oh man, another day at work, I can't wait till 5 o'clock comes, and already thinking about like getting back home so you can play Nintendo or whatever that is. And I think that that's a big metric that gets missed and overlooked by every product or project focused organization. So um,
I totally agree with you. And actually, why I love that swim school so much, and they've left a major impact on me, is because the key is the child learns best when they're having fun. And in Agile, that's morale. And I think we've all worked on projects where we're, rushing towards some arbitrary deadline where we don't really understand the value behind what it is that we're doing. And Agile really prioritizes putting value first. We prioritize based on value. That's something that we need a lot of transparency around. And something that we had to do in the swim school is talk with the parents and explain to them, like, we understand you have these goals, but the child learns best when they're having fun. And we need to go at the child's pace. And so in situations with you where, they're coming in screaming and they're reaching for mom and we're prying them off her t-shirt, we're actually asking, hey, mom, could you watch the class, but hide yourself so that we could turn the child's attention to us. You as the parent is the child, you're their safety. And we can't establish a relationship and bond with them and show them how much fun they're going to have if their attention is elsewhere. And so I think as a company is transitioning away from project to product-driven development, where are they focusing their attention is really the theme that we're starting to hit on right now.
Yeah, and you're talking like they're part of the experience. They're part of the innovation that's happening, right, in swimming. And like Brad, when we were talking the other day and about working on a manufacturing line, and I asked you the question of, do you feel that you were looked at as a human being that was part of the innovation, or were you just I forget the word like a squishy extension of the manufacturing tool, right? And showing up to work and being a part of something that's bigger is always what motivates me, right? Like, but I don't want to be a cog in something that's bigger, right? Like, I want to be a human that is valued for my ideas and innovation, and that's what always brings out the best in people. The other side of the coin, though, is like there was somebody that I used to work with early in my career. His job was this was back when I was at Macmillan Higher Education, and we were, manufacturing, e-learning modules and ed tech and stuff like that. And we sat near each other. His job was to take Excel spreadsheets that had quizzes in them and reformat them in a way that could then, so that then he could hit a button that said import, and then he would reorganize things a little bit in this tool, and then he would click export, and then he would send that off to and that's what he did all day long. All day long, he took Excel spreadsheets, cleaned them up a little bit, imported them, cleaned them up a little bit more, and exported them. And I remember talking to him. He really felt comfortable and loved that comfort of knowing what his job was every single day, right? And that just wasn't me, right? That wasn't who I was. I wanted to be a little bit more creative and innovative and problem solving and whatnot. And I talked to him a few years back. He's still doing the same thing, right? We're the same age, and he takes comfort in that. So, there is that kind of employee as well, that I think that's something that's always stood out to me.
I think that's an interesting dynamic because in Agile, we talk about organizing teams around highly motivated individuals. And there's this expectation that you have these individuals that want to troubleshoot and they want to own the work they're doing. They want to solve the problems in their way. But to your point, that's not everyone. I definitely know people who enjoy what I would consider tedious work. There's comfort to it, as you mentioned, or they're able to, I don't know, listen to a podcast or think about other stuff while they're doing it. And I don't think that Agile is necessarily saying like, well, don't hire those people or fire all those sorts of people. It's okay, well, let's find work that makes sense for them. And then let's find those motivated individuals for the innovative new development type work that we know we need to do to be competitive.
Yeah, I agree with that. Except, so I came on board, the person that I replaced, right? I was responsible for a lot of things. One area that I was responsible for was all custom media production, right? And it was, taking a lot of the files that people like that person were putting together, and then coordinating the production efforts with offshore development teams. And the thing that nobody in the company really knew how the sausage was made. The last person that did my job didn't know how the sausage was made. And I started asking questions because I wanted to know how the sausage was made. And what I realized was that I was managing the production of these files that would be used in tools like WebCT and Blackboard and Angel, Moodle, and Sakai, these e-learning platforms that universities have to manage their courses and whatnot. So that this way, when somebody bought like Macmillan's Psychology 101 textbook or whatever it was called, they would then get this course pack that would be able to load into whatever system they had. And we would create the course pack for each of these systems for various versions of that system as well, right? And what I found was that like 60% of the files we were creating were actually for systems that were no longer being used by any university in the country, right? Versions that were so old that were sunsetted. And so within the first like month and a half that I started this job, I realized that we were overspending by about like $600,000 a year, right? And like had somebody replaced me who just wanted to, pull levers to, move things from this side of the Kanban board to the other side of the Kanban board, the company would have never realized that, they were building things that were already like completely out of date,
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I like my experience with every company that I was at where I was in-house, right? As like Agile project manager or project manager hyphen Scrum Master or whatever, right? Like when I would bring these kinds of things up, they would often fall on deaf ears, right? Like, and my secret sauce back then, the thing that I always said I was great at was I saw the patterns that existed within software delivery cycles, right? And some of those patterns are positive patterns that indicate like we're going to get this done, it's going to be great. And some of those patterns equal maybe there's something that's needs to be examined here, or some of those patterns are like this is definitely not going to work, right? Like it's how are people communicating, how are people collaborating, how are they able to resolve conflicts, how are they able to identify and address competing priorities and things like that, and to me like that's one of the biggest setbacks that a company going from through the maturity cycle of going from a waterfall based project way of thinking into product development is whether or not people are speaking up and being heard and being having what they're saying be evaluated, and then making a decision like is this something that we want to figure out how to action on now, or is this something that we can set aside for later. But there were just too many times where I felt like no matter what I said, no matter what pattern I saw, no matter how real and tangible it was, right? Like we were just going to let ourselves get smacked in the face, because we just got to get it done. We'll just get it done. We'll deal with it another time.
Yeah, I'm curious, Mariya, what is, I guess, your experience with trying to get other leaders to care and to hear the message, especially because I believe they have competing priorities, and that's my understanding is the challenge.
Something that was really impactful on me in helping to answer this question is that book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And something that it talked about is disagree but commit. And so there are needs and fears that the people involved in leadership around this project, so they have some kind of need, and that need needs to be heard. And as the Scrum Master who's coaching through these situations, if I can understand that need, then I can help them see how that need is fulfilled in these product-driven approach. And that actually opens us up to having a conversation where, depending on how comfortable they feel with you, how strong your relationship is, they might actually start opening up about the challenges that they're having in transitioning over to a product-driven approach. And so I think there's no right answer here other than talking to them, what is their need, and continuing to open up that discussion and helping them recognize how their needs are fulfilled, or maybe how their needs are now a little bit redundant as they move on to a product driven approach. The easiest example I can give with this is, I think we all know those rag sheets: red, amber, green. Just tell me if it's on track. What they're really needing to hear is, do I need to lean in? Do I need to respond? Do I need to act in some way here? And the status sheet would signal that to them. How do they get those signals in a product driven approach? It might vary depending on the company you're in, the situation where you're at in the transformation, but that's the area to explore for me.
See, my experience is a little bit different with the rag sheets, right? Like I would have loved to have somebody ask me for a rag sheet because they wanted to know where to lean in. For me, it was, give me the rag sheet that says that I should feel comfortable. You know, give me the rag sheet that says everything's okay. Because we don't have a line item if it's not, right. There's no line item in the budget to fix it if it's not.
I would divert their attention away from the rag sheet and more so towards the sprint review, or encourage them to maybe take a look at the product backlog. Are there ideas? Are there needs? Are there concerns reflected? And thirdly, I would encourage them, if there is an impediment board or some aggregated list of impediments from the teams, pull that up and have a conversation with them about it.
Yeah, the sprint review is definitely the place, right? Like, if people aren't going to the sprint review, if the wrong people aren't in the room, right? Um, as a Scrum Master, as a coach, right? Influencing people to show up and creating that positive experience to get them to come back, and value that, on both sides, right? For the developers as well. There's a lot of work that goes into preparing for a sprint review from a developer. And if they put that work in and time after time, nobody shows up, or, people show up, but they don't give any feedback, or, they're not going to want to value a sprint review either.
In those situations, I usually ask, have you asked your stakeholders what they want out of the sprint review? Right? Like, you have to think of ways to get them engaged. But I agree. I've seen that similarly, like the red, amber, green, or right, like the iron triangle, is it on time, on budget, and scope. And then when you're shifting to agile, it's like, okay, well, what's the team's velocity? Right? Or, how did you hit your, what's your capacity? How did you hit your story points completed over the last few sprints? And those are useful tools, but I also view the sprint review as an opportunity to come up with the metrics that you want them to care about. Because if you share those metrics, you're essentially telling them this is what you need to care about.
So let's break it down, right? Let's start at the bottom, right? And again, bottom, top, whatever, right? Like, but for lack of a better term, at the bottom, right? So you're a Scrum Master, you're in an organization, and they're treating you like a project manager a bit. People just need to get things done. You don't really have the space because you're so bewildered by the pace of delivery and everything, and you get a moment to get a little bit of clarity and realize, well, wait a minute, I'm a Scrum Master, I'm not a project manager, right? Like, where do you guys think that that first realization of, oh shoot, right? I've been gaslit for the past 6 months or 3 months or a year. I was supposed to be a Scrum Master, right? Like, where would you lean in first? What would be the first thing that you guys would do?
I would lean in with the team. The person closest to the problem is the one that understands what the solution should be. And I think the people who are the developers, the team that is actually executing, have a wealth of knowledge of what's working, what's not working, what improvements are needed. And as that conversation unfolds, you'll start identifying there's certain things that the team can't do themselves. And that opens you up to a conversation with stakeholders or leadership of like, hey, when this example happens, XYZ, this is the impact onto the team and the work that they're trying to do. And you're not really finger pointing, you're not blaming, and you're also introducing an empirical response, or an empirical way of looking at the situation. And that kind of takes the ego out of it, and it allows leadership to kind of perk up the ears, and they say, oh, you mean when we introduce a new person onto the team, there's actually an onboarding period. They can't be productive from the first go right away. oh, it might actually impact how, like, the team has to figure out, how do we receive, and what are their strengths, and how do we have to change, like, that's additional time that might not be budgeted for in the project plan, but will impact the way the work is being done, will impact the output, the outcomes, all of the metrics that they might be keen for.
I want to throw another pebble underneath your heel, right? So let's assume for a second that this team is focused on delivery as well, right? Everybody in the organization, they're using the Agile words, they're using the Scrum words, but they are just 100% focused on delivery. We've got to hit this target, right? The project says we've got to get done by Q4 or whatever it is. It's usually Q4. How convenient! It's usually Q4. Um, um, right, and nobody's giving you the time or the space, right, to slow things down a bit, just to be introspective a bit, right? Like what type of evidence would you need to figure out where to start, right? Like what are some ideas to get people to care? Like how can you get people to align with, the snake oil that you're selling, which is Agile?
Yeah, I think there's so much of it depends, right? Like in this sort of scenario, who's on the team, roles, what the team's working. There's so many different things. I think for me, the thing that I would recommend first is making a list of those things that you see as impediments or challenges, and then ranking them. What are the things that are within my control, and what are the things that are outside of my control? And start with the things that are in your control. And you can even do like a circle of influence tolerance type chart if that's easy to say, like, okay, these are the things that are going to be the easiest for me to influence, and just start chipping away and start getting wins. I think between that and making sure to like co-create with people is really another way to get buy-in. So you come with these things, hey, I want to address this. You go to whoever it impacts and you say, hey, I've noticed this challenge. Do you see that as well? And if they do, then you say, oh, well, what do you think we should do to improve it? And a lot of times people do have opinions. And when they co-create that new solution with you, they're already bought in. You're not convincing, you're not selling anymore. They're not resistant because it's their opinion. But also you're starting to help people. And when you help people, even if it's not the most important thing to you, it could be the most important thing to them. You start to get buy-in, and then they start to listen to you more and more.
Yeah, and the other thing to call out, right, is I think we all suffer from this. I definitely suffer from it a lot, which is I've seen how beautiful and shiny and rosy it is. There's, you know, full chilled beer kegs on the other side of the fog of war. I've seen it, guys, come along, right? Like, and it's this place, but the journey to get there is this big thing. We've got to figure out how to improve collaboration. We've got to figure out how to, set up automated test benches. We got to get better story writing. We got to, and we often forget that it's these little things that we can do, right? And we should celebrate those little things, right? So the first thing of celebration is, all right, I created a list. I've got a list of anti patterns that I've observed with the team. Huzzah, right? Like celebrate that, right? Or, you know, wow, I realized I am being gaslit a little bit, and I've, like that's a small win, right? Or like Brad, you said, some things are easier than others and getting collaborators. I got one person to, agree and align with this one anti pattern that, that's out there. And, now we're a team of two, even if it's just on this one thing. Right. And it still sucks, right? It still sucks because everybody's, plugging away and chugging away, and things aren't working so great. But there's that one little green blade of grass now that's starting to grow, right? In the garden of Scrum and Agile. Um, so like for me,
Yeah.
that's the biggest takeaway. Oops, I just banged my chin on the mic because I'm so excited. Um, but that's the biggest takeaway for me, right? Is that like as as a Scrum Master in an organization that's treating you like a project manager, you may or may not ever get to, do the transformation in the big, huge way, but you're going to get to do a lot of small little wins to move things over time. And when you're feeling down in the dumps and wondering, like, do I want to get a new job? I'm tired of this. Like, why won't they listen to me? You know, go back and look at those small little wins that you've got. Keep a log, right? Keep like a little gratitude journal
Mm-hmm.
of the small wins that you've made over the way, right? So, all right. So now let's assume we've got a coalition of the team is now on board. They're starting to speak up. They're starting to talk about their problems, even though not all of them are able to be solved. But you know, um, where do you go next?
I'd go to product personally. So one of the key behaviors I start looking for is if somebody has something from this team that's doing the delivery, who does that stakeholder go to? Do they go to the project manager? Are they coming to me as the Scrum Master? Are they coming to the developer directly? If they're coming to the developer directly, they're probably bypassing somebody whose responsibility it is to set the goals that the development team will deliver against, and that's the product org. So I start looking at, in the communication pathways within the organization, is product in the conversations related to the topic that the development team is working on? And are people, like, product can't always give an answer. This is a common criticism I hear of Agile, is like, I want to go to the developer directly because it takes too long for product to get me an answer. And so me as a Scrum Master on the team, that's a signal for me to educate, hey, this is what the product owner is doing. They're vetting your idea. They're talking to engineering or developers and figuring out, do we have existing capabilities we can leverage and rejig to be able to satisfy this need, so that we can get some feedback on it, which will inform us on how much more we need to build out. Are those types of exploratory conversations happening? And if the stakeholders, as I have that discussion with the stakeholders, sometimes they realize, like, oh, I'm actually really interested in that. And you know what, like, understanding where this fits for us strategically is really the answer that I need. And if I had gotten that answer, I might be able to go back to the client and not even bother the developer. And that would save the organization a ton of time and create more focus as well on the things that we know we want to drive for.
Okay, so what I'm hearing in there is a couple of things, right? I just want to try to distill it a little bit. Like, 'cause, one is product separation a little bit from the team, right? Product owner is part of the team, right? And as a Scrum Master, being a servant leader to the product owner, roles and responsibilities, right? So making sure that roles and responsibilities are well understood and well defined, championing a product owner so that they're well established in that role, and helping to evangelize so that the executive or senior leadership or whoever that is who might be going around product starts to recognize the authority and responsibilities of that product owner, right?
Correct. That's correct. And I think it's easier for stakeholders and folks moving away from project-driven development. They're so used to going to one person, the project manager. So it's really easy for me to say, just go to the product owner instead. And go to the product owner, what they're really doing is they're taking it to the team. And they're involving the team in the decision-making process and the solutioning, rather than the decision-making process, solutioning happening in some kind of closed, siloed room. And then it's like a carrier pigeon that sends it to them, and they get it, and they're like, I don't understand what any of this means, but I'm going to do my best to derive that understanding. And then we're going to build something, and we're going to bring it back into that closed room, and they're going to be like, this is nothing what we wanted. I don't understand. And all of these judgments and shaming and blaming starts to come into the equation. So it becomes a little bit more of a destructive, closed conversation, whereas bringing it to the team, yes, it's going to take longer to cycle. That is an investment, not a cost, because the team is iterating on the decisioning, the solutioning in such a way that allows them to also learn and kind of think through, how would we build out this solution? In project management, we're going waterfall, we're going line by line, we're kind of delivering against that preset plan. And I think if I can bring our society or our culture into this, what we've experienced with the last 3 years is that, we're going to think that masks don't do anything. And then we're going to learn after some time that masks do actually something preventatively that protects us in some way. And so it's being open and learning how to adapt and to change and to embrace new information as it comes in that the organization starts to benefit from, in taking it to the team and embracing the product responsibilities, and how product actually is an equal member in the delivery of the item as somebody who's on the assembly line or at the keyboard coding.
Yeah, another way also along the same lines, what I've seen a lot of is it's the Scrum Master sometimes, that when they go around the product person, they're going to the Scrum Master for that, and it's hard when you're part of the system, right? That's keeping things moving forward, keeping delivery together, right? To, one, realize like, this is not what I should be doing. It's what everybody needs me to doing. And if I stop doing it, things are going to fall apart. It takes a lot of bravery, right? Like I think that's the big thing here is it takes a lot of bravery to be that Scrum Master who's going to be able to take a chance and say, no, I'm not part of this system. This is your role. This is your role. This is your role. Helping people to realize that's their role, helping people to trust the system that's in place, right? So, Brad, what kind of experiments would you set up, right? Like if you were coaching some Scrum Masters who were going through this kind of thing in an organization in a scenario that Mariya's describing, like what kind of experiments would you help a Scrum Master to set up?
Experiments. Put me on the spot. Yeah, I don't know if it's so much an experiment, but usually it's more metrics that I lean on, especially when people are going around the team or going around the product owner. One of the things that I think all teams should track is it's called unplanned work. And unplanned work has many different flavors. It's the shoulder taps, it's bug fixes, it's all of that. And being able to show that, the team has spent X amount of time not on the project, the thing that you're asking for, because they're being interrupted by you, the leader or the stakeholder or whoever. And it's also a helpful metric to also justify increasing quality as well, right? If there's a lot of production support issues, but being able to actually like track and show that sort of stuff, I find, I guess, is my experiment is, how can I communicate that in ways that are more factual and less my opinion?
I I love metrics, and to me, when I see metrics, I see opportunity, right? Like, but I
Mm-hmm.
find that and this is real. This is like something I struggle with, right? I constantly run into the problem where when I'm trying to use metrics to show opportunity, people
Mm-hmm.
shut down because they see it as failure, or as an overbearing problem to solve. Have you experienced that before?
I've definitely overwhelmed people with too much metrics. So I think being conscious of how many different things you're sharing at once, and then framing it and explaining it. Usually, the problem I see is we provide people with metrics. Here are these numbers, but people don't know what to do with them. They don't know what they mean, and so usually the problem I see is it's more of that, and we need to explain to them. Similar, right? If your stakeholders are asking or your manager are asking to see your velocity over time, right? Metrics are just data. There's a story behind all of them. And so being able to tell that story is the important part. Oh, look, we didn't deliver as much this sprint. Well, that was Christmas. So we expected that. And then it's not really an issue, right? They're more smells, they're guidelines, and they're things for us to look at and see if there is a problem. There's not always a problem. So being able to communicate that, what you do with it and how you respond to it, I think is the bigger challenge I've seen when it comes to metrics.
Yeah, I've definitely fallen into the pitfall before where the metrics aren't moving the needle. And you're right, it's the story behind the metrics. If you could tell the story in the right way, or even better, I find that like if you can provide the metrics to somebody else, right, like to your team, right, and help them
Mm-hmm.
to then tell the story with those metrics, that works really well. But there's a fine line between, doubling down on metrics
Mhm.
and becoming Chicken Little, being dubbed the Chicken Little. The sky is falling. The sky
Yeah.
is falling. So, um, I also like to look at. I've learned a lot from just the simple things, like looking at Tuckman's theory of, or I always say it wrong. It's Tuckman's theory of group dynamics. Um, you know, um, team is, the team is forming, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then there, what was it? Forming, storming, norming, and
Forming,
performing, and then adjourning,
norming.
right? Um, and reflecting on that pattern, right? Not just with the team, right, but with just groups of people. So like, um, one on one, right? Like there was a time where I was an agile coach, and there was another coach that came on board, and we were disagreeing, right? And we weren't working well together. And there's always, in every engagement that I've ever been on, thankfully, and I can't wait for this person to be me. All right, like I want to be this person someday. There's always a sage old agilist that's there that has the right ism to say to you in that moment. And he looked at me and this other person, and he goes, "Wow, you guys are really storming right now, aren't you?" Right. And it really took it back for me. I realized, like, in that moment that, it's not that I didn't like this person. It's just I haven't figured out how to communicate with them yet. And they haven't figured out how to communicate with me. And this is just a natural part of the process, right? This is a natural part of the process. We are disagreeing, and, you know, um, and let's figure out how to move forward on this kind of thing. And so, I like to look at that in all aspects, right? So, you know, h-
Mm-hmm.
how is the lead developer um, engaging with the product owner, right? Or how is the architect engaging with the team? Or you know, how are two Scrum Masters on lateral teams engaging with one another, and things like that, and I find that in and of itself is a great metric, right? It just comparing the relationships that exist, right? Getting back to, we're not just, squishy objects that are extensions of a bigger tool and a cog in the system. We're humans, we're people, with interpersonal relationships. Um, and my background with getting my ICF uh, associate coaches certification through IPEC, right? My background was learning about energy leadership, right? And what we realize is that
Mm-hmm.
um, people's thoughts and feelings either lead to action or inaction or something in between, right? And what is how is the overall group feeling, right? What are they thinking about themselves? And that's going to lead to either their action or their inaction. Or like if we're saying, all right, we want to change it up, we're going to stop using hours, we're going to use this thing called story points, right? How does that make them feel, right? Like, why are they afraid to maybe adopt this new thing called story points, right? What do they think about story points? Looking at empathy maps from a persona. What do they hear? What do they see? What do they feel? What are their pains? What are their gains? What are their hopes? Right. And, um, like looking at the development of any organization from maturity to help them move from project to product, right? Like, what are the personas that are at play there? So,
I do want to wind back a little bit uh, to what we mentioned earlier. Is we were talking about the Scrum Master helping with the team, and Mariya mentioned, product is next in her mind. Where I see most companies and most Scrum Masters struggle is in that transition of what's next. And um, I think it's because a lot of companies in this situation, their Scrum Masters aren't as experienced as well. It's a new thing for them as well. And so they don't know what to do. And there's that justification. What does a Scrum Master do? Right? That comes up all the time from leadership. And they tend to have those project manager responsibilities still because we don't know what they're supposed to do if they're not doing that. And some Scrum Masters lean into that because they don't know what they would be doing if they're not doing that. Or I see, oh, I'm ready for a second team or a third team. But if you're using Scrum Masters and you're applying the Scrum Guide, the Scrum Master gives service to the team, the product owner, and the organization. Most of these Scrum Masters are stuck at the team. They're giving service to the team. I'm done. I don't know what to do. What are you doing to give service to the product owner? To Mariya's point. And then even furthermore, a lot of these challenges we're talking about, the organizational changes, the agile coaching type stuff, is service to the organization. And so kind of playing a little bit off of what you're saying there too as well, Drew, with like the feelings in that is, you know, what are you doing to help shift those feelings across the organization? And what are you doing to give service outside of your team in order to enable your team to be more effective?
So, do you feel that you could be a product owner?
Me?
Yeah.
I've been one. Yeah.
Yeah. And what about you, Mariya?
Briefly, a long time ago when I was first introduced to Scrum. Since then, I fulfilled it when product owners have exited, but not through proper training. I wouldn't feel confident moving into the role.
Well, the reason why I asked that is there's a couple of things. One is like whenever I'm with an organization that's hiring a new product person, like I'm crossing my fingers that they're not just going to hire an SME, an industry SME,
Mm-hmm.
that they're going to hire somebody who, like, I would rather have a product owner who has like zero industry experience in the product that we're building, right? But understands the nuts and bolts of how do I talk to my stakeholders, gather information from them and customers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, gather information from them and then craft a set of features and then be able to work with my team to then refine a set of stories in there, right? And earlier in my career, I took the CSPO course, right? I took it with Dave Pryor, leading Agile, who's absolutely amazing. The leading Agile podcast is absolutely phenomenal if you guys haven't listened to it. But, um, you know, like service to your product owner, requires that you understand what product ownership is. And so that's like what you're saying, Brad, I think is really important, right? Like service to the organization, service to your product owner. As a Scrum Master, you need to know like a little bit about what it means to be a product owner, right? And we've talked about on the
Yeah.
other side of the coin, right? Like, we've talked offline, Brad, about like whether or not a Scrum Master needs to have been a developer before, right? And,
Right.
um, it's helpful. It's definitely helpful, right? But you need to just be able to like not necessarily walk in their shoes, but maybe try on their sandals a little bit. Understand the words, and it's the same thing with a product owner, right? Like if you're going to serve your product owner, it's a good thing to really delve in a little bit deeper past like the CSM and the PSM to really understand a little bit more about what it means to actually craft a backlog and own a backlog and maintain a backlog. So um, well, look, we're at the 50-minute mark. And, we had gone into this conversation with the idea that we were going to talk about this from a perspective of a Scrum Master, from a perspective of a product owner, from a perspective of an Agile program coach or product coach, right? Portfolio management. And, we talked a lot about at the Scrum Master level. And I think that's really good that we did that. I think we make this into a series, right? This is one of those like, it's early in our podcasting experience. And I think we just need to come back to the table on this discussion and maybe say, all right, today we're going to talk about what if you're a product owner in an organization that's still, treating things like a project. So how does that sound to you guys?
I love it.
I'm down.
Okay. Well, before we wrap up on this, right? Like, is there any last minute things that we want to talk about from the Scrum Master perspective?
Yeah, I have a point, and this is tied to my personal experience. So if you've been the project manager and you find yourself now being the Scrum Master, list out all of the responsibilities you had when you were a project manager and look at them through the Agile lens and see where they actually move, because some of those are going to become waste, right? Like we know project plans, timesheets, status reports, those don't exist in Agile. They're actually things that are going to slow us down or become barriers in some way. But there's things that a project manager does that product now owns, such as road mapping and formulating release plans, managing the budget and risk. And if you've been a project manager, you probably have a wealth of skill set or techniques that your product owner could benefit from. And as you go through those responsibilities, you're going to find that some of those project manager responsibilities are going to fall onto the leadership team or the developers or even the stakeholder. And that kind of gives you sort of like a roadmap or a loose plan on areas that those groups might need coaching in. And you should find confidence within yourself because you've done them yourself as a project manager.
That's great advice. Brad, what do you think? What's your like? What would you say to the Scrum Master that we're talking about right now?
Yeah, especially when we look at the transition from project management to Scrum Master, action I think looks different, and that's something that you have to understand, right? We would say, like, if you say, oh, a Scrum Master removes impediments, a project manager would say, yeah, I do that too. But in a lot of organizations, what that means for a project manager is I have a list. I've created a list, I've identified the risk, and I've communicated it out. Well, that doesn't solve anything, right? So not being afraid to get your hands dirty, I think, is the big shift and the big thing I would say, and goes back to the whole, right, how are you giving service to the product owner or the organization as well, is you have to get your hands dirty. Nobody else is going to make the changes, and at least, like, doing something and failing, in my opinion, is way less aggravating than just sitting there and stewing in the dysfunction.
Awesome. All right, and so my advice, right, my little tidbit, my gem, um, to add to your gems, is when you're finding yourself in this situation and you're the only person that seems to understand this, and you're feeling very alone, right? Find your community. If you can't find your community inside your company, look elsewhere, right? Start joining Agile meetups, Scrum meetups. Um, find like agilemastery.com is Mariya and I both go to the agilemastery.com lean coffees that happen once a week, which are phenomenal, right? It's a great way to recharge. It's a great way to remind yourself, I am being gaslit a little bit. I am not crazy. I'm supposed to be a Scrum Master, right? So if you can't find your community internally, find your community externally. That'll be your support in helping to figure out how to sustain and how to move forward. So
Definitely.
well, guys, this was a great conversation. I love that we were able to tie in a little bit of swim coaching as well. I know we didn't get as far into this topic. I think maybe the next episode should be, maybe not the product owner first, but maybe we spend some more time. How can a Scrum Master be of service to the organization and product and so on and so forth? But this has been great. So, Mariya, thank you for joining us today. And
Thanks for having me.
that's awesome. Brad, as always, thank you for being here with me on this journey.
Thank you, Drew, for facilitating and emceeing today. Thank you, Mariya. It's a pleasure getting to know you and hearing your
Absolutely. And you
thoughts.
guys this conversation's reminded me of a lot of things that I need to go take back to work right now. So I'm very grateful for your openness and your
Cool.
experiences.
Thanks, everybody.